Hello and thank you for joining us today. I'm Garima Batra, Content Marketing Specialist at cloudlimbs.com, and I'm excited to moderate this event. In the next 30 minutes, our speakers Chris Gunning and Martha Hernandez will discuss what it takes to get your cannabis lab ready to meet the various requirements of ISO 17025 seamlessly. Now, let me quickly introduce our first speaker for the day, Chris Gunning. Chris is the General Manager of Accreditation Services focusing on the Life Sciences Group with the American Association for Laboratory Accreditation, A2LA, where he has been employed since 2009. He also has 10 years of laboratory experience in the biological field, working in several regulatory environments from research to CGMP-compliant vaccine production. This experience allows Mr. Gunning to appreciate the important role of a quality management system and technical competence, both from a data defensibility standpoint and in generating consumer confidence. Before we get started, I'd like to go over a few points so you know how to participate in today's webinar. All attendees will be in mute mode throughout the webinar. This is an interactive webinar, so we encourage you to ask questions anytime during the presentation by entering them in the chat box. The questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. We will take as many questions as time permits, but we do want to end today's presentation on time. So if we are unable to answer your questions today, we will get back to you on email. It's time to hand it over to Chris. Chris, it's over to you.
Thank you very much. Let me get my slides up here for everyone. Thank you for that very kind introduction. I'm excited to be with everyone today to share some of the top, we'll call them issues that cannabis labs have faced as they are preparing to get their labs accredited. So I'll be focusing on three separate areas as we go through this presentation. But first off, I want to talk just a little bit about what accreditation is for those labs that are new to this requirement that many states are implying. And then we'll get into the three topics of management systems, getting your equipment up to par for meeting the 17025 requirements, and finally, ensuring that you have competent staff trained. So first, what is accreditation? If we go to the strict definition, it is a third-party attestation related to conformity assessment bodies conveying formal demonstration of their competence to carry out specific conformity assessment tasks. And this definition comes out of ISO 17000. Key phrases here that we have are, we are really looking to see competence, both of your staff, all of your support services that allow you to produce quality data, and secondarily, specific tasks. When we accredit laboratories, we don't accredit all capabilities generally. We are looking at very specific tasks, and those tasks will be listed out on your scope of accreditation. Many states do require specific methods to be accredited, and they will show up on your scope. The standard that we are using to accredit laboratories is ISO IEC 17025, and the current version is 2017. And this standard was developed for all types of testing and calibration laboratories. So there is some vaguity as you read these clauses. So we wanted to really focus today on three specific areas to have you focus your efforts as you're preparing for accreditation. The principles that when we, A2LA, come out to do an assessment leading to your accreditation is, again, we are looking at your technical competence. We are looking at your integrity. Do you have impartiality? Do you have confidentiality? Are you transparent with your customers, both in pricing, both in methods that are going to be used, and in the final reports? Are they clear? Do you treat your customers with fairness? There is no impartiality issues here. And finally, we are looking at that very specific scope of accreditation, which will list out the very specific methods that you are seeking accreditation for and the analytes. So when I say analytes, we could be talking about pesticides. We would list out all of the pesticides that you are seeking accreditation for, and they will be examined during your assessment. The bottom line of accreditation is three things. Do you, as the laboratory, say what you intend to do? And this is going to be in your documents. All documents provide instruction. You're telling your staff how things are intended to be done. And then secondarily, does the laboratory do what they say? And that's what we'll look at when we come on site to visit you for your assessment. We've looked over your documents. Now, can you show us that you follow them? And that third bullet point, can you prove it with your records? Considering that documents tell us what we intend to do, your records are your historical evidence that you did what you intended to do. So we will spend a lot of time on site looking at records. We will spend a lot of time preparing, looking at your documents before we even come to visit you. So now that we understand what accreditation is, let's look at the three areas where we as accreditation body tend to see some lacking in preparation of cannabis laboratories seeking accreditation. The first of them being management system requirements. And these management system requirements are generally found in Section 8 of 17025, but I'll show you a few that pop up throughout the standard. The first two clauses, the first two sections, as you see on screen here, are impartiality and confidentiality. Can you show that you're acting with impartiality, and do you have confidentiality records on file? The standard will say that you do need to identify risk to your impartiality on an ongoing basis, and that you must have legally enforceable commitments for confidentiality. So the standard places a lot of emphasis on these early on as they're the first two sections. And then we move into structural requirements. Can you show that you're a legal entity? Do you have organizational charts? Do you have clear job descriptions? And then we move into Section 8, which is titled Management System Requirements. And I just mentioned on our previous slide, two of those integral parts are ensuring that you have control of your documents. So these are your policies, your procedures, anything providing instruction, both internally generated and externally. So these could be kit inserts. They could even be posters throughout the lab that provide instruction. And then records, your historical evidence that you followed your documents, are covered under Section 8.4. Are they identified? How do you store them? How do you protect them? How do you ensure that they are backed up, especially those records stored electronically? Can you retrieve them? Can you retain them? The standard will tell you that you have to set a minimum retention time, and that may be dictated by the state that you're seeking accreditation in. And then we move on to risk and opportunities under Section 8.5. Your laboratory has to constantly be thinking with that risk mindset. What are the risks to our operations when we're running these methods, when we're purchasing equipment, when we're choosing a limb system to work for us, when we're doing corrective actions? All of these require you to have a risk mindset. And along with risk comes improvement. The entire point of 17025 is to ensure competence, it's to ensure quality results, but it's also to help your laboratory improve. So you'll be seeking feedback from your customers, you'll be doing management reviews, as you see on the last bullet point here, to help your laboratory improve. Now, there will be times in your laboratory that things do not go as expected. And when those pop up, we have to have a system in place for dealing with that. That's where you see this non-conforming work and corrective actions. When things don't go as intended, what steps do you take? This will be detailed in a procedure for non-conforming work. And once you've identified that non-conforming work, what actions do you take? Corrective actions, including root cause analysis to prevent that problem from happening again. And our final two bullet points here on management system requirements deal with two activities that you'll be required to do. One is an internal audit, and you determine how often you will do this internal audit. But the intent here is you're taking a look at your operations internally to check for compliance to 17025, to your customers' requirements, to your state requirements. And you're doing that on a regular basis to ensure you remain in compliance. And then when A2LA comes in, we are performing a third-party audit. But it's always a great idea for you to get your system up and running, do your own internal audit, and then schedule your initial assessment for accreditation. The other mandatory action that you're going to take is a management review. And when we think management reviews, the intent here is to look at your system kind of from the 35,000-foot view, looking down on all the inputs to your system and determining, is this working well for us? What can we change? The intent here is to identify trends, maybe in your PT performance, your QCs, complaints, feedback that you're getting, and use that to improve. So there we've covered management system. Now we want to get into the equipment requirements. And this is a big venture for new laboratories seeking accreditation, getting all the equipment in place and demonstrating all of the records that are required. First off, it has to be accurate. Is your equipment capable of achieving the accuracy required by the methods you're running? Is your HPLC calibrated, your GC? They all require calibration, your balances, your micropipetters. And when I say traceability on screen here, what I'm talking about is you need to have your equipment calibrated by an accredited calibration provider, or you can do your own calibrations in-house as long as you have traceable reference standards, reference materials, and you're calculating the measurement uncertainty of that calibration. All of your equipment needs to have unique identification so that it can be traceable to the specific test. And this includes your software and your firmware. And as you're getting that equipment put into place, if you're a new laboratory, you need to verify that it is functioning properly prior to use and maintain a record of that verification. All equipment is obviously going to need some type of maintenance over time. So the standard will require you to have maintenance plans in place and to have records of the maintenance that occurs over time. You'll also be required to have a procedure for handling, transport, and storage of your equipment, use of the equipment. This could be covered in the equipment's user manual, or you may need to supplement that with additional instructions. The standard also includes reference materials as equipment. And when we're talking reference materials, this is what you would use to calibrate your HPLC, your ICP, or your GCs when you're setting up your calibration curve. And these reference materials also need to be traceable. And that traceability can be demonstrated by purchasing your reference materials from a 17034 accredited reference material provider. And lastly, for the equipment is probably the biggest hurdle for cannabis labs getting set up is method validation. Ensuring that the methods you intend to use in your lab have been suitably validated, because there are not a whole lot of methods that have been developed specifically for testing cannabis. So generally you're making changes to published methods. Those changes need to be validated. And they need to be validated for all matrices that you intend to test. If it's flower, if it's edibles, if it's tinctures, if it's lotions, whatever it is you're testing, you have to maintain validation records for all of those matrices. And our final of the big three that you need to consider when preparing is ensuring staff competence. And the standard really covers this under section 6.2. You will need to have documented competence requirements, and that's going to include what's the minimum education, qualification, technical knowledge, training, skills, experience. What are you looking for when you're hiring your staff? What are the minimum requirements? And then you will need to have a procedure and records for How did you train this staff? How did you select them? What type of supervision do they require? When are they considered authorized to run those specific tests that are on your scope of accreditation? And finally, how do you monitor their competence over time? This may be an ongoing demonstration of capability, maybe using proficiency testing, but you get to determine how you monitor that competence. And finally, making sure that you have specific staff authorized for very specific tasks. And that could be development, modification, and verification and validation of your methods. You need to have staff that are duly qualified to perform those tasks, along with analyzing your results. Maybe this is not your bench level technician, but maybe a more senior member of your staff that looks at the results, looking for interpretations. What are you going to put on those final reports? Who's going to review them and authorize those results going out to your customers? Considering also, you may be making statements of compliance on your final reports. When I say a statement of compliance, that may be a pass or fail result, in compliance, out of compliance. You need to also be considering a decision rule. And when we say decision rule, we're talking about how you apply measurement uncertainty to those final results. All things to consider as you're looking at personnel training and authorizing staff to perform those tasks. So that covers the big three issues that we as an accreditation body tend to see labs struggling with on their first assessments with us. I'll be happy to answer any questions after Ms. Hernandez provides you with her information in her presentation. It's my pleasure to be able to talk with you. I also have my contact information here, but as noted, we'll be happy to also chat with you after both presentations are over. I thank you for your time and your attention and look forward to talking with you.
Thank you, Chris. That was an insightful and interesting presentation. A quick reminder to the attendees, if you have a question, you can post it in the chat window. Our speakers will answer your questions after the presentation. Our second speaker today is Martha Hernandez. Martha is a scientist at cloudlimbs.com. Before beginning her professional career as a scientist with us, Martha spent 12 years working as an analytical chemist in various industries, from clinical diagnostics to forensics in Mexico. Martha loves to attend trade shows as she gets the opportunity to meet and interact with new people and thought leaders from different industries. Getting the job done in less time is a priority for her personally, as there was a time when she would spend over 14 hours per day manually filling in the logs and typing the results, wasting valuable time and making mistakes due to exhaustion. When she's not traveling for work, Martha loves to dance and play with the pups Homer and Benito. Martha loves to pose with the pups and share pics on her social media accounts. Now let's welcome Martha.
So thank you, Garima, for the introduction, and thank you, Chris. That was extremely interesting information. I'm sure everyone here is taking notes at this time. So, as we have seen, the ISO 17025 standard has many requirements. So I will explain how it is possible to comply with the top 3 challenges with an informatics tool. So first, let's talk about challenges. There are quite few in an ISO 17025 accreditation, and our friends from the A2LA told us which one are the top 3 of them. So it will be in the management system and the instruments and with the personal. So with the management system, we will see the role-based access to staff, the document and record control, and internal audits. With instruments, the challenges are in the calibration and maintenance, and with the personal, it's the training and competence. So I'm going to ask you some questions to see how do you handle these challenges in your laboratory. So the first question will be, how do you assign role-based access to your lab staff? We know that it's a requirement of the ISO 17025. How do you do it? There's a lot of personnel in your lab. How do you assign this role-based access to the activities on your laboratory? Well, I'm going to tell you, there is an informatic tool called LIMS, Laboratory Information Management System, that can help you with this. With LIMS, lab personnel can be granted or revoked the access from various activities based on their role in a lab's hierarchy. So in the image, you can see that the master admin can assign rights to the staff. We can see that there are different staff positions like the manager, the technician, even the visitor. So some of them have access to every activity in the sample model. They can view, they can edit, they can dispose samples, and some of them only to view the information there. So this is how a LIMS helps you really easy to assign this access to your lab staff and their activities. The next question will be, how do you control your laboratory documents? We have a lot of documents in the laboratory. So how do you do it? In files, in cabinets, or in several computers? How do you control the access to these documents? Well, LIMS also can be the solution to this challenge. Document control is for your SOPs, and LIMS can help the cannabis labs to manage your documents and these SOPs. For example, you can manage this SOP related to the staff safety, to waste disposal, to instrument calibration, sample preparation at a centralized location. Moreover, you can provide role-based document access rights to the staff so that your staff members can securely access these SOPs when they need to. And LIMS also maintains the version history of the documents. So it helps ensure that your staff members access only the latest version of each document. So this avoids any confusion with any obsolete procedure. And speaking about control, how do you maintain your records control? Well, you can maintain a chain of custody of all the samples through their life cycle. We know that the cannabis testing labs need to trace every gram of each sample. So LIMS can help you track the entire life cycle right from the time a sample gets into your lab till it's disposed of. In the image, you can see that we have a sample that is transferred from the master admin to the user 4, then to the user 1, 2, 4, and then back to the master admin. So here you can see the complete life cycle of this sample and with a date and time stamp. So there cannot be any altered data here. There cannot be any manipulated data. So everything is automatically here with a LIMS. So the next requirement in the management system is the internal audits. These are the key to understanding a laboratory's compliance with the requirements of the ISO 17025. So an internal audit is kind of a self-assessment conducted to identify critical issues and helps determine the effectiveness of a laboratory risk management capabilities. So all this data is analyzed in these internal audits to provide recommendations for improvement. Okay, we know that internal audits are the key and are very important to all the standards, and especially here in ISO 17025. But me as an analyst and as lab staff, well, it could be a headache. It could be a nightmare for us, because when I was an analyst, we had to stop all the work in the lab because we have to manually fill out all the lab logs correctly, all the records, check if our instruments were calibrated and maintenance, and if we have all the evidence to prove it. And also if there were new SOPs, we have to had our training on that and take exam and check if everything was okay. And well, we have to stop. We stopped the work in the laboratory at least for 1 week. So it was a waste of time for us. So we'd hate that internal audits. But with LIMS, these internal audits can be really easy because with the LIMS in place, this manual manipulation of data is not possible. Why? Because of the read-only audit trail. So this classically a problem that was a crossing a date and put it another one and crossing an hour, put it another one. Well, we didn't have the best practices. I'm very sure that the A2LA will never accredit our laboratory because of that. But that happens when a laboratory is still using paper and is still using spreadsheets. So with the LIMS, you can track all these laboratory activities, such as any changes made to documents, sample records, or test results, and even the login activities of the staff. So it's really, really cool to switch off the paper and change it for a LIMS. And also, LIMS help you in your internal audits to track deviations from the SOPs. You can monitor the sample processing status, you can enforce your standard operating procedures, and track the deviations using a LIMS. The next question will be, how do you manage the calibration and maintenance of your instruments? We know that there are many instruments in a cannabis lab, and sometimes it is really difficult to keep up with their calibration and maintenance. Well, with a good LIMS, you can schedule instrument calibration, manage maintenance data, and assign instruments only to the competent staff, thereby assuring the validity and accuracy of data. Here you can track not only each instrument, but the subcomponent of each instrument, along with its maintenance and calibration details. So there is a built-in alert system that will inform the lab managers a preset number of days ahead of any needed maintenance or calibration. So your lab manager can call the technician and schedule the next calibration or maintenance for your instrument, so they will be always up to date with it. And also, we know that the cannabis testing lab performs testing of several samples on a day-to-day basis. So the manual transfer of analytical data from instruments to a LIMS is error-prone and reduces laboratory efficiency. So for minimizing the test turnaround time and for maintaining data integrity, it is important to automate the data transfer process, because at the end of the day, you as an analyst, as a technician, the last thing that you want to do is sit it down and check all the results to see if they are okay and to copy them in a log or in papers or copy them in a spreadsheet. Could be a lot of mistakes there because you're tired, you want to go home, and the last thing you want to do is to stay there and copy all these results. So a good LIMS can be seamlessly integrated with analytical instruments for this bidirectional data transfer, thereby reducing this turnaround time and eliminating chances of transcription errors. These are ERP, and ERP collects, stores, manage critical business metrics, and support business operation of testing laboratories. And ERP also helps address traceability and compliance issues faced by testing laboratories. And moreover, a LIMS can also be integrated with a third-party software, such as a billing software, to streamline completely your business operations. And the last question that I'm going to do it today, it's how do you manage the staff training and competency? You know that, well, we know your staff needs to be training on each step of the process, from lab safety, from waste management, equipment calibration and maintenance, inventory management, inventory storage, everything. We saw it with Chris. The ISO 17025 is really clearly with this. Your personnel needs to be training and needs to be competent to perform any activity in your lab. But not only to comply with some standard, it's also by their own safety. And I'm going to tell you a sad story that we had. So we all know that the cannabis testing lab have numerous flammable solvents. So one of our customers was working in a third-party testing lab. So he was analyzing the potency of some samples, and he started to smell a volatile solvent, probably pentane, because this very low boiling point solvent was stored in the laboratory. And they find out that apparently in an inappropriate container. So it spilled and accumulated vapors. An explosion occurred. Yes. And so the employee was injured and he was hospitalized and received treatment for burns in this unfortunate accident. So the laboratory then understood the importance of staff training. So now they are our customers and they now use LIMS to manage and track the staff training and to ensure that all the lab staff have received this training. So how LIMS help them with this? I'm going to show you how. Here you can see training programs. In the staff safety, there we have some staff that did well and some that did not do well. So a LIMS can generate a custom training and competency matrix. So this matrix helps the laboratory managers to quickly visualize the competency levels of the staff based on the scores and can assign analytical tasks to the trained staff only and provide additional training to the incompetent staff. So here is how you can manage your personnel and make sure that they are competent to perform all the activities in your laboratory. So we have seen all the benefits of deploying a cannabis LIMS, and in conclusion, well, it increased the test result accuracy, boosts the productivity in your lab, and makes your quality higher and higher, and also get low the costs. So this is everything from me. Thank you for your attention, and don't forget to put your questions in the chat box. We will try to answer them all next.
Thank you, Martha, for all that information. Attendees, we have launched a short survey. I'd request you to take a moment to fill out the survey form that you see on your screen. We are now going to begin answering questions. As a reminder, you can still submit your questions through the chat box. We have received quite a few interesting questions, so let me move straight on to these. The first question we have from the audience is, what does the timeline look like from estimate to accreditation?
So that's
Chris,
a good.
would you like to take that one?
Sure, it's a good question, and I would prefer to rephrase it a little bit from the timeline from estimate to accreditation to potentially thinking about it more of from a complete application to accreditation, because a lot of labs do seek estimates long before they're actually ready to seek accreditation. So if we really focus on when a lab applies for their accreditation, if they have a complete application submitted, the timeline looks roughly around 4 to 4.5 months to complete the accreditation process. And that includes scheduling that initial assessment and writing up a report and having the lab respond to all their findings. So it's highly dependent on how well that assessment goes and how quickly the lab can address their findings. But as an average right now, we're seeing 4 to 4.5 months from complete application to accreditation.
Thanks for answering that fundamental question, Chris. Moving on to the next question. Before accreditation, how much of a lab's scope needs to be covered regarding proficiency testing?
Well, for that one, it's highly dependent on what state you are in. Some of the states do require a successful PT round before a lab can be accredited for a method, but in general, just 17025 for A2LA We simply require a lab to show successful participation in one PT event before they can be accredited, just to show that they have the ability to run PT correctly, but it would not be for every method. And then we would allow the lab from there on out to set their own PT schedule under Section 772 of 17025. Labs can determine what their frequency is. But again, this can be overridden by the state regulators in the state which the lab resides.
All right. Chris, there's a related question. The question is, are PT tests enough to validate non-standard methods?
I would say no. I would say they're a good tool to use in validating your methods, but validation is much deeper than just showing that, yes, you can pass a PT round. If we're looking at different matrices at different concentrations, we want to include all of that in our validation to determine what's our limit of detection, what's our limit of quantitation, what's the measurement uncertainty surrounding this method. And once we've figured all that out, a PT round is a good way to confirm your validation, but it would not be a singular tool for validation.
Right. Thanks, Chris. The next question is one I'm sure you get very often. And the question is, from your experience, what are the most common mistakes new cannabis testing labs make?
Well, there's a couple big ones, and one we were just talking about here is validation. Labs are seeking accreditation without doing proper validation studies, because one of the biggest challenges we have in the cannabis industry is there are very few validated methods for all the matrices that are now coming out. When the industry was just getting started, we were just talking about flower. Now you're talking about flower and edibles and tinctures and oils and lotions, all different types of products that labs are now seeking accreditation for without the proper validation records to support it. But even more fundamental is we're getting a lot of cannabis labs that apply because they have to show that they've applied for accreditation in their state to get a license. And these labs are nowhere even close to being ready for accreditation, but they have up to a year to get accredited. So we have had labs that apply that don't have a building yet. They don't have equipment yet. They don't have personnel. So we're really trying to educate them more on the front end to determine what are the minimum things you need to have before you apply for accreditation.
Okay. Thanks, Chris. This was an important one for anyone trying to set up a cannabis testing lab. Thanks for answering it. The next question is about a LIMS. So, Martha, this one's coming your way. The question is, can any instrument be integrated with a LIMS?
Well, Garima, I often get asked that question at some trade shows that I attend. So, well, most analytical equipment can be integrated with a LIMS. So if you have one or more HPLC, GCMS, ICP in your laboratory, well, a good LIMS should be able to integrate them all. And if they are not already integrated, well, a LIMS vendor should be able to build integration for you. So yes, anyone can be integrated.
That's helpful, Martha. There are several instruments in a lab, so it's great to know all of them can be integrated with the LIMS.
Yeah.
Next, someone from the audience is asking what an A2LA assessor's experience looks like. They would like to know if they are technical.
So A2LA does use contracted third-party assessors for all of the different schemes that we accredit laboratories to and conformity assessment bodies. So generally, we are looking for someone with at least 10 years of bench experience to apply to be an A2LA assessor, and then we put them through some pretty rigorous training, passing exams, and they have to have several oversights with senior assessors or senior staff members here. But yes, they are highly technical in nature, and then we can teach them the 17025 standard, but they must come with that base technical knowledge, and we do oversights on a regular basis at 1 year and then every 3 years for all of our assessors. And one of the things we have to be very careful of in this industry specifically is potential conflicts of interest. So generally, we're looking for assessors in multiple different states so that you're not having an assessor from a competitor lab come in to assess you. all of these come into play when we're seeking assessors to perform your assessment.
Thanks, Chris. Quickly moving on to the next question. Can you explain how measurement uncertainty fits into the accreditation process?
Sure. I mean, this is covered in Section 7 of the standard when we're talking about methods, method validation, and then measurement uncertainty obviously comes in. So any quantitative method within the laboratory is going to require the lab to calculate their measurement uncertainty. And regardless of whether they report it out to their customer, it must be calculated for all methods so that we can determine how accurate your methods are. And it really comes into play, as I mentioned during the presentation, in decision rules. If you're making statements of compliance on your final reports, and many cannabis labs do, saying this product passed or failed, or it was in compliance or out of compliance, you must determine how you are going to apply measurement uncertainty to that final result so that your end user of the data is very clear, especially when we're near a tolerance level, what the measurement uncertainty of that value is, because it could push it in or out of compliance.
Right. Thanks, Chris. The next question is one we're all looking for an answer to. The question is, please explain how a cloud-based LIMS is cost-effective when compared to an on-prem LIMS.
Well, we saw all the benefits to have a LIMS, like we are all interested in lowering operating costs in the laboratory, and implementing a LIMS helps by reducing the cost by automating processes and ensuring that every SOPs are being followed, and eliminating any manual data entry jobs that are maybe error prone. So these are only the benefits of a LIMS, but a cloud-based LIMS has additional benefits, like you don't need to buy some expensive hardware or a server or all the hosting costs, and you also don't have to hire any IT personnel. So this makes it affordable for the small to medium-sized laboratories. And another benefit is that the quick deployment that makes your laboratory up and running quickly. And another one could be an automatic software updates that ensure that all the users can always access the latest version. And one of that, it's very important, it's server backups and disaster recovery mechanisms. These are available to avoid any data losses. So these are the benefits of a cloud-based LIMS.
Great, great. That was pretty informative, Martha. Now, the next question is, what are some of the most common incorrect assumptions that newly formed cannabis labs seeking accreditation for the first time could have thought differently about?
Well, I mean, we covered some of these in the previous question as some of the big potholes that a lot of our labs fall into when they're applying for accreditation, with the validations and making sure every system is in place when you're ready to apply. But some of the common issues that we see on these initial assessments are that labs have written a management system and are not necessarily following it. And this is one of the most common deficiencies in any 17025 scheme assessment, is that labs tend to paint themselves into corners with their management system procedures that they write, and then they're simply not following them. We also see a lot of issues with measurement uncertainty, which we were just talking about, is that a newly formed testing lab a lot of the time doesn't understand how to calculate measurement uncertainty. So they have typical deficiencies there. We see deficiencies in document control, post-it notes all throughout the laboratory that are not controlled, which is why you need a LIMS rather than a paper system. These are some of the more common issues, equipment records, which we've covered today. But for any laboratory, the assumption that it's going to be easy, and I'm just going to lay it on the line, an assessment should not be easy. You want an assessment body or an accreditation body to come in and challenge you to make you better. And that's what we pride ourselves on, is having assessors that will do that.
Interesting, very interesting, Chris. This is the last question that we'd be able to take today. And the question is, what is meant by management system type A and type B?
So you do see that in the beginning of Section 8, it talks about type A and type B management systems and how they apply in 17025. But essentially, they're the same. They're not really options. What we're talking about here is type A will say that if you're not previously accredited under a different standard, you are going to develop a management system to meet the requirements of Section 8 laid out in 17025. Type B says if you are already certified under ISO 9001, which is a management system certification, you could use that management system to meet the intent of 17025 requirements in Section 8. Meaning you don't have to build a whole new management system to comply with 17025 if you were already 9001. In terms of assessment, it does not change how we assess. We're still going to assess all the requirements of Section 8. It was only meant to clarify that for simplicity's sake, a 9001 management system is nearly identical to what is required in 17025. In fact, many of the clauses were pulled directly from 9001 into 17025, and not just 17025, but all of the other 17,000 series of international standards.
Great. Thanks, Chris. Unfortunately, that is all the time that we have today. Attendees, if we were not able to answer your questions today, expect an email from us very soon with the answer to your question. Thank you, Martha and Chris, and thank you, attendees. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.